This is M87 star, a supermassive black hole 27,000 times the size of our own sun. If our planet could survive its inescapable grasp, it would completely dominate our sky. Time, space, and life as we know it would be unrecognizable in every way we've ever known. We'd stare up into the eye of the universe, unable to comprehend the secrets locked away inside it, hoping to one day conquer the greatest unknown in the final frontier. And this is the story of how I photographed a black hole.
Okay, look, I know I went kind of crazy on the intro for this one, but before we get too deep into the astrophotography talk, I want to take a step back and talk about where those intro shots came from, because they took an incredible amount of work. As many of us space nerds probably are, I'm a huge fan of the movie Interstellar, and Christopher Nolan is probably my favorite director of all time. And over the last 5 or 6 years in my free time, I've been teaching myself Blender, a free open source software for 3D rendering and visual effects. I'm not gonna lie, there was a pretty steep learning curve, and I often found myself with these huge expectations and very underwhelming work to show for my effort. For example, a few years ago I had this brilliant idea that I should try to recreate my favorite shots from Interstellar as a tribute to my all-time favorite movie. Well, as it turns out, that was an incredibly overambitious idea, and I had no idea just how big a project like that would be. I worked on it non-stop for a few months, but eventually I hit a wall where I felt like I just couldn't refine things to the level that I wanted them to be. And it definitely doesn't help that I'm comparing my own work to the most scientifically accurate depiction of a black hole ever in a Hollywood blockbuster movie that had a budget of $165 million. So the project sat dormant on my computer for almost a year now because I got pretty overwhelmed and I just wasn't making much progress. That was until recently when I had another brilliant idea to see if I could capture any evidence of a black hole with my own amateur telescope from home on Earth. So I won't sit here and bore you or try to overhype the shot that I got because, as you know, it's nothing even remotely close to the renders you just saw. This is M87. And from this wide field view, it doesn't really look like anything out of the ordinary. Just a normal elliptical galaxy. But when we get a little bit closer, we start to see something peculiar. This tiny little smudge is actually a massive jet of plasma being ejected out of the black hole at the core of this galaxy. And although it looks small, it's absolutely gigantic in terms of cosmic scale. It stretches about 5,000 light years outwards from M87 star, the black hole at the core of the galaxy. I was so fascinated with M87 star because of the sheer scale of it. It's estimated to be 6.5 billion times the mass of our sun and 24 billion miles across. A few years back, the Event Horizon Telescope actually imaged this black hole. The EHT is a giant radio telescope network roughly the size of Earth, as there are multiple smaller instruments situated all over Earth working in conjunction with one another to create one giant telescope. Needless to say, that's a little bit bigger than my 100mm refractor. When comparing our current view of M87 star to that of our own Sagittarius A star, the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, they appear to be roughly the same size, even though the distances from us to them are vastly different. M87 star being about 50 million light years away, and Sagittarius A star being about 27,000 light years away. To shed a little bit more light on the scale of things, Sagittarius A star is only about 14.6 million miles across and 4.3 million times the mass of our own sun. So according to my math, which you should definitely double check, M87 star is about 2,000 times bigger than Sagittarius A star and 1,500 times more massive. And without fully understanding what I'm talking about, I think that means that M87 star is absolutely huge. I didn't even know if this project would be possible with my setup. Going back to my last video where I mentioned a few things about image scale and sampling rate, I wasn't really sure that I'd have the resolution to do any sort of justice to such a small detail. So once again, I fell back to the 183MC Pro, but this time at the ASCAR 103's native 700mm focal length. This would put me at about 0.7 arc seconds per pixel for my sampling rate, which is pretty oversampled for the quality of sky I'm normally working with. I had no clue whether this was a good idea or not, but I figured if I never tried, then I'd never know. And if there's anything you guys should know about me by now, my curiosity usually gets the best of me. As you probably saw, this image didn't really require a whole lot of integration time. I mean, I'm sure it could have been better had I gone deeper, but I was pretty happy with the results after 2 nights. And that kind of sparked more questions in me about what the 183MC Pro was really capable of. Like I mentioned in my last video, I had kind of written this camera off at this point because of all the challenges I faced when trying to process the images. But since the dark nebula in my last video turned out pretty good, I felt like maybe there was still more left for me to do with that camera. So on all the clear nights I've had recently, I put it to the test and gathered as much data as I could on a couple different targets. I couldn't find much information in a brief Google search to see when this camera was actually released, as I know it's a pretty old sensor, but I got mine in early 2020. And I needed to know, was it still worth having in 2024? And the more I've used the camera lately, the more I feel like I can provide some insight and answer that question. Also, something to keep in mind is the only dedicated astronomy cameras I've ever used are the 183MC Pro and the 294MC Pro. So take what I say with a grain of salt. As a beginner, I don't think this was the best camera choice that I could have made, but that's because I don't think I knew how to use it the right way. The resolution and detail this camera captures absolutely blew me away, especially considering the seeing quality in my skies is normally not great. Comparing these images to the 294, the amount of detail is absolutely insane. And that's not a dig at the 294, it's proven to be one of the most popular beginner astro cameras for good reason. But I'm a bit of a pixel peeper and I like zooming in on my images to find all the hidden details that I can't see from just viewing it in a wide field. The high megapixel count of the 183 really packs a punch in that aspect. However, it does have its drawbacks. I've only ever used this camera at gain 111 because that's what was recommended by ZWO and many other users. And at that gain level, I've found that shorter exposures are much more beneficial than longer ones. And with that comes a pretty big increase in processing time and data storage. But I think that's a pretty fair trade-off considering all the extra detail I was able to resolve. I know there are plenty of other awesome astro channels out there that can provide a much more detailed review of this camera, probably spending days or weeks on one single object. But that's not the kind of astrophotographer I am right now. I'm more fond of exploring and seeing new things every night that I have the opportunity to set up. In fact, I wouldn't even call this a review. I just think this is more of me trying to justify whether I should keep this camera or not. So if I was starting at the beginning again, I think I'd probably choose the 294MC Pro or even the 533MC Pro. Those cameras have really proven themselves to be awesome for newcomers to the hobby. But if you're looking for a small sensor with high resolution on a tighter budget, the 183 might be great for you. It's actually got me thinking that I should build a secondary rig around my 183MC Pro, maybe something more portable that I could use as a high-speed data gathering setup. I even revisited some of my very first shots using the William Optics Z61 and the 183MC Pro from 4 or 5 years ago, using some of my newer knowledge on post-processing, and some of them turned out awesome. So I guess that goes to show that maybe back then it wasn't really the camera's fault, it was probably more user error. But that's okay, we all had to start somewhere, you know? I think it's a great camera when you know how to use it, and it'll definitely be sticking around in my kit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble about this camera and checking out some of my black hole renders. Thank you for stopping by to watch. I appreciate every single one of you more than I could possibly say with words. I hope you're making the most out of every clear night you get, because tomorrow is never promised for any of us. I'll see you next time.